I'm here for one reason. To challenge you for a world championship match in the WrestleMania.
You're listening to Binnall of America Audio.
You get the Giant, the only professional wrestler who's still undefeated. And Hulk Hogan, Hulkamania is over.
And here in America, we sort of have a split in the sense of within ufology over how to study the phenomenon, and it breaks down sort of like nuts and bolts ufology,
yes,
versus a spiritual aspect of ufology.
Right.
Where would you say?
Yes.
Where would you say?
We have that in France too.
Okay.
Yes, we have that in France too. We have the nuts and bolts side of ufology, which is rather the side of the official groups and the official studies, actually. The Cometa report is a very nuts and bolts publication and study. And the same as Jean-Jacques Velasco, the engineer, his book is very nuts and bolts. And I must admit that I am myself a little rather on that line, although I differ from these officials because I open to the idea of parallel worlds and other dimensions. Now, I would like to try to explain something.
Sure.
Because I have mixed feelings about that because I sense, well, right or wrong, that these complex aspects may be used by some people to try to confuse matters.
Yeah.
And it may be a strategy of protection of secrecy.
Huh.
So that this is a very difficult discussion to have. And maybe I'm going to shock some people now because I think that I have this feeling about the many books of Jacques Vallée.
Yeah.
Jacques Vallée was a very good ufologist at the beginning. I should have mentioned that. He did a couple of very good books, groundwork of serious studies in the 60s. Then he went to the United States. He became assistant of astronomer Hynek, who worked at the time for the Air Force. And there was something strange happened. Toward the end of the 60s, Jacques Vallée published the first book, which was very interesting. In fact, it was translated in French in 1974, Passport to Magonia. You probably have heard of that book, I suppose.
Oh, yes.
And this was probably the first book which opened the gate to that sort of reflections that maybe UFOs were not what we thought they might be, like nuts and bolts craft, but something much more, much stranger.
Yeah.
Coming from other dimensions, etc. And he opened the way also to the reflections, where he wasn't the first one actually, but he launched a new reflection on the historical aspects with all the old legends with fairies, etc.
Yeah.
And after that, he published another book in the 70s, toward the end of the 70s, called Messengers of Deception. I remember that I was a bit shocked by that book at the time, and I wrote to him, but he didn't answer. I told him, I don't understand what you are saying now, because he was beginning to suggest that we were in the midst of many lies and disinformation, but he had a very strange approach to that. He was suggesting already that many stories of nuts and bolts UFOs, and of maybe crashed UFOs, that was a bit later, but he wrote many books like that in the 90s, like Other Dimensions, Confrontations, and Revelations. There was 3 books in a row developing that sort of idea that the stories of UFO crashes, of abductions, of extraterrestrials were all wrong, and were probably, some of them at least, were disinformation. So that's where the things were, the discussion became very complex and difficult.
Yeah,
I think. So there is that aspect, but yes, there is also in France distinction to be made among people who believe in UFOs. I shouldn't say that. That's not a good word. who have an interest in UFOs.
There you go.
There are those who keep thinking in terms of nuts and bolts crafts, or being able to travel through other dimensions, which is already a bit more complex. But also, there are other people who more and more have been thinking in terms of spiritual dimensions, or whether angelic or demonic also, because we also have authors like that in France, like in the United States. In the United States, one of the people who opened that door was John Keel, for instance.
Yeah.
With some famous book like the Mothman Prophecies. And we have that sort of thinking in France, too. We have about the same categories of thinking in France as in other countries, I would say.
What would you say the thoughts are in France regarding the American UFO scene? You know, is there resentment of America? Because, as you said earlier, you think that we have probably more secret files than France, and that we've been in the UFO game, if you will, for longer than France. What's the attitude in France regarding American ufology and America in general with regards to UFOs?
Yes, I think there is something like that, yes. You said resentment. Yes, there is a kind of irritation and resentment. You see it in the Cometa report, for instance. Mm-hmm. You can sense that in the Cometa report. They mentioned the problem of UFO secrecy, and French ufologists have that way of thinking. I must admit that I do have that way of thinking too. Although I like very much the United States, and I like to be invited there. And I was last year twice, by the way. I was in Roswell and at the X conference in Washington. Mm-hmm. I had the pleasure to be invited, thanks to your friend, I think, Trish Sheridan.
Yes. By the way.
And so there is. Let's try to be clear as possible. Mm-hmm. I don't have a personal grudge or hostility against the American people, not at all. But we are some people who think that yes, there is a big secrecy, and we would like to know more about that. Now, may I add something? Another idea which seems important to me. Mm-hmm. It is that the question is it wise to ask so hard for the end of secrecy? You know, I'm not so sure at all. After having thought about it, perhaps it is better if some secrets remain secret for the time being. I don't know. Perhaps I am surprising you now, but that's the way I begin to feel now.
Just to extrapolate on that, what secrets do you think need to be, I know they're secrets, so we don't know exactly what they are, but what aspects of the secrecy do you think need to be held back?
Well, I would say that it's probably very complex in the sky. Well, the history of mankind is complex, and the history of other civilizations is very complex, probably. Mm-hmm. From extraterrestrial or other dimensional, etc.
Yeah.
And they may not be all friendly.
Yeah.
There may be some dangers outside. That's one reason. And the fact that there have been so many abductions and seemingly genetic manipulations, all that is not very friendly. It doesn't sound very friendly to me. Cattle mutilations also, and another reason is that there is that historical dimension of the whole story, which may have tremendous effects if it was revealed all at once, you know, in one big package.
Yeah, and I just want to make note that the question here about American ufology came from our writer, Michael Chiron Brun, so that's not a question. I just wanted to make note of that. The next subject I want to talk to you about is the role of the media over there in France and their perspective on the UFO phenomenon and maybe how that's changed over the years. In your recent article here, The Death and Rebirth of Official French Ufology, you mentioned that it seems like maybe things are getting better. So I guess just talk about that evolution and maybe when it was bad and how it's getting better and all that good stuff and how it's changed over the years.
Yes. All right. Well, there has been some hesitation in the French press in the last few years, especially regarding the recreation of the official service. But yes, as I said in my article, perhaps the mood is changing and is becoming a little more positive and favorable. Well, we will see if this is confirmed in the coming months and years. But if you permit, I would go back in the years before.
Sure, go ahead.
There was a more open attitude during many years, in fact. Like I mentioned already, a series of articles and radio programs in the 70s, which were favorable, and like the radio program of Jean-Claude Bourret. And he was very popular at the time. I remember there was a conference by Jean-Claude Bourret in the 70s at the big concert hall in Paris, the Salle Pleyel. It was full of people. There were 2,000-3,000 people, I don't know, at least.
Wow. To
listen to Bourret on UFOs, you see. Mm-hmm. So it was still favorable. Even in the 80s, we had there was a very interesting program with many people in 1984 on French TV. And Jean-Jacques Velasco was there, and there were other well-known people. And again, when I published my first book, that was in 1994, I had a number of radio and TV invitations on French television and the press. I had articles like in the weekly magazine Paris Match and French television. But there was a big accident in the following year. That was the scandal, between quotes, of the autopsy, the alien autopsy.
Oh yeah.
Which appeared in the summer of 1995, and it was everywhere around the world. There was the big shock of the alien autopsy.
Yeah.
And in France, it was particularly dramatic because it triggered a very, very violent campaign not only against that film, but against Roswell, and about UFOs.
Wow.
More generally. What happened is that when the first articles appeared, there was a first show on the number one French television network, TF1, at the end of June, with Jacques Pradel, the journalist Jacques Pradel. And then hell began to break loose with a series of articles led by Pierre Lagrange. I think I mentioned this man already. He was a sociologist who has been discreetly negative, I would say, very ambiguous. But then, at that time, he signed a big article in the popular magazine Science et mixing everything and saying that it was completely ridiculous and that Roswell is ridiculous. It's a story of weather balloons, mogul balloon, and that there was an inquiry which had been made by the General Accounting Office, an official study. If you know a little bit about Roswell, you know what I am referring to.
Yep.
There was, which was published about the same time, nearly at the same time as the autopsy movie. And that, said Lagrange, they had accepted the mogul balloons explanation of the Air Force. But that is not true. If you read the study of the GAO, it is not true. They didn't say that. They said that the inquiry about what crashed at Roswell continues. That's what they said.
Yeah.
So it was very, very bizarre and aggressive attack, suddenly. led by Lagrange and followed by many others. To tell you a little detail, amusing detail, in the first article, he mentioned that he and his colleagues of Science et Vie, they mentioned that there was green blood on that film, which was a proof that it was Bardonnay, it was hoax.
Yeah.
The film was in black and white, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
So it was crazy. It was very strange. What happened next is that Jacques Pradel, the man from TF1, didn't realize that it was going to be very, very dangerous for him. And he presented the film in October in a big show. I remember very sharply, you know, the story because I was just publishing my own book on Roswell at that time.
Yeah. And
I was invited at that show. It seemed to go well on the stage, but then it was a very, very harsh campaign, and he lost his job, actually.
Oh, wow.
He was the best paid man in French TV, and he lost his job after that, to tell you.
Wow.
The situation. And that was a turning point, and the French media became very negative, globally, against, not only against that story of autopsy and Roswell and all these stories of secrecy, of conspirationist theories, etc. They became very, very hostile and negative. I am able to speak about that for my own sake because I published several books and with dwindling sales, you know, at the time during these years. And but what happened is that there was a reaction, and we have already mentioned the Cometa report in 1999. So that was the beginning of maybe a new page which opened then.
Yeah.
And which led to the recreation of the official service in 2005. And there was a change of mood in the media. For instance, the same newspapers which had been so violent in 1995 and years after, which were L'Express and Libération. Libération is a trending daily paper, and L'Express is a major weekly magazine. They had been very aggressive against the film, the autopsy, and again against the Cometa report in 1999. But then, when the CNES, the French National Center for Space Studies, reopened the studies, they changed their mood, and L'Express, the magazine L'Express, devoted 6 pages, positive pages on the CNES studies, the Shaitan studies, that happened in 2006. But there was a kind of hesitation. Some papers kept publishing skeptical articles, but others began to change a little bit, and I can testify to that because last year, I had one full-page interview in the same newspaper, Libération, and it was positive. They gave me the one page to talk positively about UFOs. So the fight is going on. The fight is going on.
Yeah.
Between skeptics and believers, between quotes.
Yeah.
Because there was last year, there was a very negative, a big TV program on national television, which was quite negative. It gave the floor to the skeptics like this man from the French CICOP, which is called the Groupe Zététique. The Zététicians. It's a crazy name. And the leader is a scientific person, Henry Brock, who was on the stage and who had the last word with Pierre Lagrange also and people like that. Mm-hmm. So the situation today is more open, probably, but it is not. We have not yet won the game.
Yeah. Now, we've talked about the media and the government and the people in quotes, like you say, the believers. What about the everyday people in France? What is their perspective on the UFO phenomenon, would you say? You say, that originally a lot of these ufologists, after they didn't get answers, they became skeptical. Would you say that's sort of the general trend in France as far as the people go, or what would you say is the attitude in France of the general population?
From what we can learn with the polls, we don't have many polls, not as many as in the United States. I made a study about that several years ago, and when, let's say, roughly speaking, the American public is ready to admit the reality of UFOs, I would say, it depending on the years, from 30% to 50%, I would say. Mm-hmm. I don't know if recent polls have confirmed that. It depends how the questions are posed, etc. But it's more like 50% clearly. But in France, it is less. I would say that it is rather on the side of 20% or 30% would be a maximum in France.
Okay.
You see, so the French people are more skeptical, yes, than the American people regarding UFOs and maybe other things. we still have a long way to go in France, I believe.
Okay.
But we are making some progress.
There you go. Thanks to people like you, of course.
Well, I hope so, yes. I have written 5 or 6 books now. And there are many other books. I would like to pay tribute to my friend who is dead now, Pierre Guérin, was an astronomer, maybe the only astronomer who dared to take sides publicly in favor of UFOs many years ago. He was a guest on a big French TV show on the beginning of the 70s, by the way, and where he presented the book of astronomer Alan Hynek. Mm-hmm. And it was a successful show. And the last year of his life, in 2000, he finally published his only book on UFOs called UFOs, the Mechanism of Disinformation. So he was very concerned about the problem of UFO secrecy.
Yeah.
There have been some other books like that. I would like to quote the book of my friend François Parmentier, which was published a couple of years ago, UFOs, 60 Years of Disinformation, you see. And it's a very well-made book. But these books and others have been attacked by Pierre Lagrange last year. So, again, here we go again. In a book which has a very, very peculiar title. It's called UFOs, What They Don't Want You to Know. And the subtitle says Army, Secret Services, Debunkers, and Other Master of Intoxication. So when you read that, if you don't know anything about UFOs and you see that cover, you may think, oh, I am going to learn things about UFO secrets. But not at all. It is exactly the opposite, in fact, because what he says is that the real debunkers are those who claim that there are UFO secrets, because there are no secrets. That's what he says. Huh. It's a very skeptical book, and a very aggressive book against all those who have worked and written about the problem of UFO secrecy.
Wow.
The main line of the book is, no, they are wrong. They are the real debunkers. There are no UFO secrets. And it has been a success. Well, rather, I don't know if it's a big success in the public, but it has awarded Lagrange another round of invitation in the big media. He's still there on the TV programs in the French press, like the Figaro and other publications. He's still there. So it's a mixed bag today, you see. There are pros and cons. It is very difficult to make a prognostic about how things are going to turn out in France in the coming months and years.
Yeah.
I don't really know.
And what would you say the reaction was over in France to the release of the French UFO files last March? And I'm sure a lot of the American listeners and American ufologists, we don't speak French, so we have to rely on folks like you to tell us what they said. So what was your take on the files that got released?
Well, my opinion is that it is a very positive action, of course. Mm-hmm. But as the engineer warned, there are no new big files previously unreleased. The biggest cases, we know them already, among those which are being published. Mm-hmm. But it is a very positive action, and it has been globally rather well received. As I mentioned, the number one French weekly magazine, L'Express, has published 6 full pages, positive pages on the Shaitan files, covering several cases like Trans-en-Provence, the landing in 1991, and other cases, famous cases like there was this French airline, Air France commercial plane with Commander Duboc, who is a witness, interesting witness who saw a huge UFO over the area of Paris. Now, this is a bit controversial because there was a radar record, but not exactly at the same place as the UFO, so it is a complex case, and which allows the skeptics to denounce it as a false case, etc. Mm-hmm. So there is still controversy. And the skeptics have published a book criticizing practically all the best cases of Shaitan. But it is not, they didn't find any publisher on paper. They published it on the internet, by the way.
Oh, wow.
Yes, it is funny because there are actually many more books positive on UFOs than skeptical books. On the other hand, in the media and the television, so far, I think we can say that the skeptics still have the advantage in the debate. It's curious.
Yeah, it is interesting. Do you think that that is a result of an organized cover-up, if you will, and it involves the media as well, and the government and that whole thing?
That's a big question. Is there a French chapter of organized cover-up? I wouldn't go as far as saying that, but I strongly feel, like the people of Comita, by the way, that yes, there are some agents of debunking in France. Yes.
Yeah.
I don't want to insist too much on that, but we definitely have this feeling, like my friend Parmentier and people of Comita and others. Mm-hmm. Yes, we have that impression, but we can't prove that.
Yeah.
It's difficult to discuss that.
Just like in America.
Yes, probably, yes.
Now, in your article, you raise an interesting point about the question of percentages. And
oh, yes.
That's definitely something I want to talk to you about. So let's sort of dive into that issue of percentages, because you sort of take the perspective that it's more than the usual believed 5 to 10% that most people chalk up, and you say it's probably higher. So let's talk about that.
Well, yes, it's one of the very positive aspects of the release of the files, the official French files, because they have completely reevaluated the percentage of unidentified cases. Mm-hmm. If you go to the website, you will see that they give 28% of unidentified cases. So it is much more than it used to be. Even recently, in the books still favorable to UFOs, like the book of Velasco and the book of Yves Sillard, now the president of the steering committee of Japan, they gave figures of 13% to 14%. So it's quite a jump to 28% now. It's rather peculiar, but when you go back in time and you see the story of the percentages, you realize that there were other high percentages like that. For instance, in the 1950s in the United States, the Blue Book asked a study to the Battelle Memorial Institute, and it was they arrived at in the Special Report 14, how is it called now, to a percentage of 21.5% of unknowns. It was a very serious study in the 50s, over the period of 1952 to 1954. There are nearly 2,000 cases, nearly, about the same as Japon, the same order of figures. And there was even another percentage, even higher, in the first study of the engineer Claude Poher. He reached 38%. On the other hand, we have been living during several decades with official percentage much lower than that, like 2% or 2 to 5%.
Yeah.
The last word of Blue Book was about 5%. And perhaps you will remember that Nick Pope gives about the same figures for the official files in England.
Yeah.
2 to 5%. Well, perhaps they are going to revise that figure too. So I think that, well, it depends how you consider the cases, of course. But I would say that very roughly the number of unknown cases is more on the side of 20% than 2%.
Okay.
Definitely.
Yeah. The final sort of question I have here, and hopefully we can get it in, is what would you say the state of French ufology is nowadays? Is it coming around? Is it promising?
Yes, it's. I think we can be fairly optimistic. I would say that the French are back on the map of ufology, and that we are going to make some progress. Hopefully. I hope so.
Excellent. And what's coming up next for you? What do you have coming down the line? Any more trips to America? I hope so. And what do you have planned?
Possibly. I don't have any invitation for the time being. But yes, if I am invited, I will be glad to come, of course. But I have just published a new book, which is not completely new, which is called Celestial Visions and Cosmic Visions, in which I try to cover the whole history of visions of all kinds, from ancient mythology to UFOs today. And I have even included science fiction and modern art, which is another topic I have studied a lot. So it's a general presentation of cosmic and celestial visions. The idea is that our relations with the cosmos is very important, and we have perhaps forgotten that.
Yeah.
Well, that's my idea.
Okay. Gildas, I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show and for your patience here with the phone issues. I really appreciate you're giving me so much time and being available over the last few days to take this interview.
Well, I was pleased to do that.
Excellent, excellent. And I hope that we can speak again sometime and really keep exploring this international aspect of ufology, because I think France has a rich history and a fascinating perspective on the UFO scene. So thank you again for coming on the show.
I thank you to have invited me.
That does it for this week's edition of BOA Audio Season 3. Big, super huge thanks to Gildas Bordes for coming on the show. I don't have a website to plug, but we do have a link up at the audio page to an in-depth article he wrote on the death and rebirth of official French UFO studies. Fascinating piece, 10 pages long. It's really outstanding stuff. Definitely want to check that out. Moving right along now, it's time for BOA Audio listener feedback. This week we're not going to read a specific email, just respond to some of the emails we've gotten here over the past week. Many people wrote in to us about the death of esoteric radio pioneer Michael Corbin, and I definitely just want to put over how hugely important Michael Corbin was to esoteric radio. He was definitely one of the people who laid the groundwork for folks like me and shows like BOA Audio. For those of you unfamiliar with Michael Corbin, definitely want to check out the website rememberingmichael.wordpress.com. It's a new website that's been set up to, as the title sort of suggests, Remember Michael Corbin. He was a tremendous esoteric radio interviewer. He spoke to just about every big name in the field, and as I said, he definitely was a trailblazer for the online esoteric world as well, We like to make a big point here on the show of remembering the history of the paranormal world that so often gets lost in the shuffle. We definitely want to put over Michael Corbin here at the end of the program, dedicate this week's show to him, and thank him for his work and contributions to the field of esoteric radio. If you'd like to be a part of BOA Audio listener feedback, there's 3 ways to do it. Yes, we've added one. You can write to boaaudio@hotmail.com, or you can go to binnallofamerica.com and click the contact button. The third method is join up at the BOA forum, theusofe.com, theusofe.com. Join up there. It's free. You can post your questions, comments, and discuss the various BOA audio episodes there. I'm going to try and throw that plug in more often here at the end of the show for folks who haven't checked out theusofe.com, the official BOA forum. Regardless of how you get in touch with me, it all funnels towards BOA HQ and into the BOA Audio listener feedback mailbag. Up next, of course, is the thanks portion of the show. Let me run down the list of the fantastic BOA staff. Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V, Tina Senna, and Rochelle Hawks. There's always some great stuff from the BOA writing staff. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday there are new columns at BOA on a continual basis. So there's so much going on at BOA. If you're only listening to BOA Audio and you're not reading the columns, you're only getting half the story. Binnallofamerica.com. Make it a part of your everyday search for esoteric news and opinion. Much like I was kvetching about last week, what you just heard in tonight's episode, hour-and-a-half long call to Paris, France. A few weeks ago you heard an hour-and-a-half call to Ireland. Before that, a 2-hour call to South Africa. Ladies and gentlemen, that's 3 long international phone calls. I can't even tell you how much those cost me. If we want to keep reaching out across the oceans and speaking with great esoteric minds from around the globe, we're going to need your help to offset the costs. How do you do that? Simple. You go to binnallofamerica.com or the BOA Audio archive page, click the PayPal button, and make a donation. No donation is too small, and all donations go towards keeping BOA Audio and Binnall of America up and running, and keeps the cost at what it is now, which is free for all of our great listeners and readers worldwide. Next week on the program, it's the 2nd annual BOA Audio Baseball Special. We got so much great feedback on that last year that I definitely want to do another one, and so it shall come to pass. I've already taped about a half hour with Paul Kimball, taped a half hour with Lauren Coleman. I've got 3 other folks on tap to tape. We're going to be talking about all the big stories in the baseball world from the off season. We're going to get the opinions of former BOA Audio guests, each of whom are great esoteric pundits and researchers. Plus, we're going to do something a little different this year. We're going to get predictions down to the division winners and wild card winners, National League, American League champions, who's going to win the World Series. All of the guests are going to have their predictions, and then at the end of the season, we're going to look back and figure out who did best and all that fun stuff. So it's going to be a really fun episode. I'm already having a lot of fun taping these interviews. For the baseball fans in the audience, they're going to enjoy this show a lot, I'm sure. For those folks that aren't baseball fans, I apologize, but we want to do something a little off the beaten path, a little off topic, a little lighthearted here as the springtime begins and the baseball season kicks off. So, next week it is the 2nd annual BOA Audio Baseball Special, featuring Paul Kimball, Lauren Coleman, and a few other guests to be named later. And on that note, we close it out here for the week. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you have or had a wonderful Easter holiday. Until next time, this is Tim Binnall, thanking you for listening and signing off.